The Victorian Christmas that most people imagine when they hear the phrase isn't quite the cozy, snowy festival with carols, Christmas trees, and warm firesides that dominates our modern holiday imagery. Yes, many beloved Christmas traditions were shaped or popularized during the reign of Queen Victoria, 1837 to 1901. But the reality of how Victorians celebrated the season was complex, varied by class and region, and full of customs that seem strange or even unsettling to us today. Modern perceptions of Victorian Christmas are heavily influenced by nostalgic novels like A Christmas Carol and by later 19th-20th century revivals of older customs, which means much of what we think about that era's festivities is actually a blend of myth, selective memory, and later reinterpretation rather than strict historical fact. ashmolean.org. +1. During the early Victorian period, Christmas was not yet the massive national institution it would become. The holiday had been suppressed in England under the Puritan government in the mid-17th century, and while it returned after the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, its importance fluctuated greatly in the centuries that followed. By the turn of the 19th century, observance of Christmas was uneven. Some people treated it as a minor religious day, others as a secular holiday, and many simply carried on with work and business as usual. The Victorians inherited this uneven legacy and helped shape Christmas into a more unified, sentimental, and family-focused festival. But it was not an overnight transformation. The sun, one of the most recognizable symbols of the modern Christmas, the decorated Christmas tree, only became widespread in Britain because of Queen Victoria's German husband, Prince Albert. Albert brought the tradition from his homeland, and an illustration published in Britain in the late 1840s showing the royal family gathered around a decorated tree captured the public's imagination. Within a few years, middle-class families across Britain were setting up their own trees. Though early decorations were simple, food items like nuts, fruit, and sweets were often hung on branches, much like earlier medieval and folk traditions. Candles were used to light the trees well before electric lights existed, making early Victorian trees decidedly more fire hazardous than today's https://www.discoverbritain.com. +1. Despite how central the Christmas tree is to our picture of a Victorian holiday now, most ordinary people in mid-century Britain didn't have a decorated tree until later in the 19th century. Many working-class families lived in cramped urban housing with limited space and resources, so elaborate decorations were rare outside wealthier homes. Instead, greenery like holly, ivy, and mistletoe, cultural carryovers from older pagan winter traditions, were hung in doorways and windows, symbolizing protection and hope during the long, dark days of winter. Recipes and roots. The image of every Victorian household gathered around a warm Christmas feast is another simplification. What Victorians ate at Christmas varied dramatically based on wealth and upper-class families. Tables groaned with roast turkey, which became more popular than goose over the course of the century. Cold meats, pies, and rich sweets. Middle-class households often tried to emulate this abundance, even if budgets were stretched. But for the working poor, Christmas dinner might consist of a modest addition to the usual diet, sometimes just a festive bird chosen through participation in goose clubs, where families paid in installments during the year to afford one special item for Christmas. Naugatuck Historical Society. One dish that became truly emblematic of the Victorian Christmas was plum pudding, often still called Christmas pudding today. While versions of this pudding existed long before the Victorian era, it was during the 19th century that the dessert became firmly linked with the holiday season. Publications like Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol helped cement the pudding as a festive finale to a Christmas meal, describing it in rich detail and turning it into a popular cultural symbol of seasonal cheer. ashmolean.org. 1. Another Victorian innovation was the Christmas card. In 1843, Sir Henry Cole commissioned the first commercially printed Christmas card, and though that first design was controversial, some criticized it for scenes of underage drinking, the idea took off quickly. By the 1860s and 1870s, Sending cards was a growing seasonal custom, and the British Post Office eventually had to encourage earlier posting each year to handle the flood of holiday mail. These cards often featured wholesome family scenes, winter landscapes, or festive decorations, but some Victorian cards also included motifs we would find disturbing or bizarre today, such as images of dead birds or supernatural figures. Financial Times +1 gift-giving also changed significantly during the Victorian period. While exchanging presents was not invented by the Victorians, they helped standardize it as part of Christmas celebrations in the way we recognize today. Gifts in many families were distributed on Christmas Eve rather than Christmas Day, and in upper-class households, there were traditions of placing unwrapped gifts on display. Children might receive toys like dolls, model trains, and other handmade or mass-produced items. But in lower-income families, gifts were more likely to be simple and practical fruits, nuts, sweets, or homemade crafts. English heritage, the Victorian Christmas, was also profoundly shaped by literature and popular culture, especially Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. Published in 1843, the novella was a sensational success and played a huge role in shaping ideas about Christmas as a time for family, charity, and goodwill. Dickens's vivid depictions of feasts, warm hearths, snowy streets, and joyful gatherings helped popularize the idea that Christmas should be a time of merriment and generosity, giving the holiday a narrative that many families came to emulate or aspire to. Because of this influence, much of what we think of as Victorian Christmas spirit is actually a literary construct that reflected and amplified contemporary shifts rather than documented daily practices in every household. Royal Museums, Greenwich, yet not all Victorian Christmas customs were gentle or cheerful. Parlor games were a staple of holiday gatherings because people had no radios, televisions, or digital entertainment. One such game, Snapdragon, involved floating raisins in a bowl of brandy which was then set on fire. Players would reach into the burning mixture to grab raisins and eat them. This kind of game seems dangerous and strange to modern sensibilities, but it was part of how Victorians entertained themselves and bonded with family and friends. Love-to-know drinks at Victorian Christmas celebrations also reflected tastes that can seem unusual today. In addition to mulled wine and beer, Victorians enjoyed a variety of warm punches and concoctions. One popular beverage was smoking bishop, a rich mulled wine made with port, spices, citrus and sugar, often served during Christmas festivities. Other variations with whimsical ecclesiastical names, such as the smoking archbishop or smoking pope, also appeared, showing a playful side to seasonal drink culture that contrasts sharply with our typical eggnog or hot chocolate. Wikipedia Victorian Christmas celebrations were also shaped by economic and social changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution. Improved transportation, especially railways, meant that people who had moved to cities for work could travel home more easily for Christmas, reinforcing the idea of the holiday as a time for family reunions. Increased production capacity made toys and decorations cheaper and more widely available, allowing middle-class and some working-class families to participate in traditions that had previously been luxuries reserved for the wealthy. ASHMOLEAN.org +1. Even with these widespread changes, many Victorians still held on to older traditions and local variants. Seasonal charity events, community feasts, and public celebrations continued alongside family gatherings, with wealthy philanthropists often organizing meals and treats for the poor. Festive events in towns and cities included decorations, music, and communal gatherings that blurred the lines between private family customs and public celebration. These communal aspects are sometimes left out of modern retellings that focus solely on hearthside warmth and Victorian domesticity. Royal Museums, Greenwich. Finally, while we now associate Victorian Christmas with snow, carols, and heartwarming scenes, it's important to remember that weather and climate realities of the time also shaped perceptions. Many Victorians experienced bitterly cold winters with deep snow, and literature and art from the period often linked winter's harshness with the warmth of festive gatherings. This connection between white winters and Christmas was reinforced in visual culture and later became a staple of holiday imagery, even in places where real snowfall was uncommon. Reddit. In short, the Victorian Christmas was simultaneously familiar and foreign to us. It contributed foundational elements of our modern holiday: decorated trees, greeting cards, gift-giving, customs, festive meals, and an emphasis on family and charity. But it also included customs, foods, games, and social practices that sit uneasily with our current ideas of what Christmas should look like. By the end of the 19th century, many Victorian traditions had become entrenched and were exported around the world. But the image of a uniformly cozy, snowy, Dickens-style Christmas is as much a product of later cultural nostalgia as it is a reflection of historical reality. https://www.discoverbritain.com+1 if you are hoping for an unvarnished depiction of how Victorians actually lived and celebrated Christmas, complete with fire hazards, flaming brandy games, eerie greeting cards, and sharp class distinctions in feasting that is closer to the truth than the idealized advertisements and greeting card imagery we see today. Understanding the complexity of Victorian celebrations helps us appreciate how much of what we now take for granted at Christmas is an amalgam of tradition, revival, fiction, and reinvention, rather than a stable, singular Victorian Christmas.